Chris here.
Good evening, Councilmember Ham. This is Brian in IT. Your sound's good.
Anyone else call in? Brian, is it just Councilmember Ham and I?
No, it sounds like everybody's connected now.
Hello, everybody. How are you? Everybody here? Good. Nice to meet you. All right. So, we're going to convene a special meeting of the San Clemente City Council, September 25th, 2020 at 5:30 p.m. And Joanne, would you like to take a roll call?
Yes. Councilmember Ham.
Here.
Councilmember James.
Here.
Councilmember Ward.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson.
I'm here. Thank you, City Clerk.
The first item on the agenda is a motion to waive reading in full of all resolutions and ordinances.
Do we have a motion?
I don't think we're needed, but I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Ham. Thank you, Councilmember James, for seconding. So we have a motion by Councilmember Ham and a second by Councilmember James. We have a motion by Councilmember Ham.
Councilmember Ham.
Aye.
Councilmember James.
Aye.
Councilmember Ward.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson.
Aye.
The next item is extension of the declaration of local emergency and imposition of curfew. And I do have some speaker comments whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, City Clerk. First off, I'd like to see if City Attorney has any kind of announcement at all before we go into the public comments.
No, thanks, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Just this, that the resolution that the council adopted last night ends on its own terms today. And so the declaration of a local emergency and the curfew will lapse unless the council votes tonight to extend them. Just to cover all scenarios, a resolution of extension is attached, but in discussions, and Eric can help me with management and law enforcement today, it looks like none of the concerns that gave rise to this have materialized. They certainly haven't worsened going into today. So we wanted you to have that by way of background before you take public testimony.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That's excellent. Thank you very much, City Attorney, for that update. Okay, City Clerk, we'd love to hear the comments from the public, please.
Okay, the first one is from John Martinez, and he writes, the proposed resolution imposing a curfew is an overreaction. First, peaceful protests are protected. Second, police actions should be examined in a timely and proper manner, which will address the problem. And that's signed John Martinez, Professor of Law Emeritus and former California Deputy Attorney General. The next communication is from Ronnie Craig. Dear City Council, I am pleased to ask the City Council members that if there is knowledge of additional protests and or if large crowds will continue to gather throughout the weekend, that you provide some sort of signage or city traffic control for the residents of West Avenue to San Gabriel. Many of you are already aware of our narrow streets, parking issues and that there is no outlet at the end of the street. Since the shooting of Kurt Reinhold, it has been extremely difficult to exit and return to our homes. Our street has been inundated with reporters, protesters, and cars looking for parking for long periods of time. Since there is no outlet, the majority of cars are using it as a place to turn off South El Camino Real and zoom down, turn around, zoom back up, and then try and figure out where to go or park. This has created a very dangerous situation for the residents and for all the kids being homeschooled during this time. Some residents have already left their homes out of fear of large crowds and of how hard it has been to exit and return to our homes during periods of time. Some nearby businesses have already boarded up. I know the City Council is faced with a lot during this uncertain time, but I please ask you to consider this an urgent matter. The next communication is from Henry Lutz. Hello, I am once again asking the San Clemente City Council to not enforce a curfew tonight. This curfew seems less like a protective measure and more like an effort to prevent San Clemente residents from exercising their First Amendment right to protest. If anything, the City Council should be doing more to hold Orange County sheriffs accountable, address police violence, and demand justice for Kurt Andrus Reinhold. As we also saw yesterday with the unnecessary arrest of peaceful protesters, law enforcement in San Clemente is engaging in lawlessness, and it must be stopped. At the emergency meeting yesterday, I heard a few council members say they were hesitant to do anything about Orange County sheriffs because there was a lack of information and incomplete investigation into Kurt's death. City Council will learn from stories reported by ABC and KTA that Kurt was unarmed, had his hands up in front of police, and that the police forcefully slammed him to the ground after only a citation for jaywalking. The sheriffs not only acted irresponsibly, they were deadly, and they took an innocent man's life. San Clemente City Council cannot wait for more information from the Sheriff's Department because the information is already there in the news. The City Council must act swiftly, demand justice for Kurt, and pressure Orange County sheriffs to fire and arrest the two officers who took Kurt's life. Anything less would suggest that San Clemente City Council is complicit with the lawless, murderous officers in San Clemente. Next email is from E. Scott Mentor. I watched last night's emergency meeting with great concern. First, the council adopted a finding of an emergency situation without bothering to suggest, much less enumerate, any particularized threats that would justify such a decision. Based on that improper finding, the council then proceeded by a vote of 3-1 to enact a curfew without offering a shred of evidence that there exists any rational connection between that action and any legitimate government interest. Let us be clear. The only violence that has occurred in San Clemente in recent days has been committed by law enforcement, specifically the Orange County Sheriff's Department. Police violence cannot possibly form a constitutional basis for denying citizens their First Amendment rights. And without such a basis, the City Council is expressly prohibited from taking any such action. In such circumstances, the Constitution simply does not permit suppression of protests by legislators or indeed by the Sheriff's Department. Thus, any continuation of such suppression can and likely will be successfully challenged in court. Therefore, with respect, I request that the City Attorney provide additional guidance to the Council on the guardrails that federal law has set in place in order to prevent state and local legislatures from so easily suspending the rights of their citizens. I further request that the council members, recognizing that no relevant emergency actually exists and honoring their collective responsibility to honor federal law and the limitations it places on the council's actions, immediately and permanently suspend the illegal curfew imposed on San Clemente residents and businesses. Next email is from Donna Vadrine. I am saddened by the loss of life that occurred on our San Clemente streets Wednesday afternoon. Kurt Reinhold, an unarmed black man, homeless in San Clemente, was stopped from crossing South El Camino Real in a San Clemente neighborhood. The two deputies, trained and armed, took him to the ground, and the unarmed man was shot twice, dying on the street. The man is shot twice, lying on the street after being taken down by two armed police deputies. Punishment should be proportional to the offense, and it is not the police officer's job to punish. We are now in crisis. City Council and city leadership demonstrate responsible action and unity. That includes candidates for office in our upcoming election. The job and responsibility of the OCSD is to serve and protect the people of San Clemente. San Clemente contracts their services. The city and the police take responsibility for police actions in our city. Take responsibility. Protect our residents, businesses, and community from extremists and agitators. Set the stage and boundaries for peaceful protests. We have a constitutional right to protest and have freedom of speech. We have a constitutional right for equal justice under the law. I agree with your majority vote for a curfew yesterday from 9 to 6 a.m. to protect and provide safety for our neighborhoods at risk. Repeat the curfew for safety and protection if needed. What was City Council's plan for San Clemente's homeless last night while under curfew? Take responsibility and inform us of your plan and actions. Equal justice for all is a way of life. We must seek transparency and accountability. Next email is from Amanda Quintanilla. Dear council members, in the interest of public safety and health and public welfare, an emergency meeting was held on September 24th and a curfew was imposed. I don't know why there was a curfew. A curfew was not imposed at the protests over beach closures or that fence. Last night's march was peaceful and it honored the life of Kurt Andrus Reinhold's life. Councilmember Ham stated that it was a day of reflection and mourning, and it certainly was. People marched down El Camino Real in remembrance of Kurt Reinhold. People kneeled and said prayers at the site where he took his last breath. They made a memorial of candles, flowers, and it included a picture of him. This is where the community, and especially his family and friends, paid their respects. Mr. Reinhold's childhood friend, Colby Devin Stewart, attended the memorial to pay his respects to his dear friend. According to his statement, he stated that, "I'm still in shock. I don't know how to process everything. Everything I remember about Kurt was always camaraderie. He has a hard exterior, but he's the biggest teddy bear if you know him, and he has kids. He has a wife." If you pay close attention to Colby's statement, his words are of his dear friend as if he was very much alive. He certainly has not processed his death, and neither has the community. Last night's march was peaceful and heartfelt, and clearly a curfew was definitely not needed. No matter the circumstances, Kurt Reinhold was killed, and it was a tragic day in our town. Unfortunately, I have to mention that at yesterday's emergency meeting, Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson tried to redeem herself from a social media post which she had posted that did not contain any words of empathy for a loss of life, and it completely lacked humanity. It is bizarre that Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson was unwilling to express any empathy or emotion regarding the death of Mr. Reinhold. However, she has no problems expressing her feelings towards the former city manager. Let me check the timer here. Okay, we're still good. Other representatives in our community expressed their sympathy regarding Kurt Reinhold, such as Senator Bates stated, "Yesterday was a sad day for our community. As we mourn the life of Kurt Reinhold and express our concern about his death and concern for the deputies involved, we have the right to seek answers and a responsibility to ensure a thorough investigation proceeds." Representative Mike Levin stated that this is a tragic situation for our community. Orange County Supervisor Lisa Bartlett stated, "I was saddened to hear of the deputy-involved shooting in San Clemente that claimed the life of Mr. Kurt Andrus Reinhold and extend my sincere condolences to his family. My deepest condolences to the family and friends of Kurt Andrus Reinhold. May he rest in peace." Let's reset the timer here. Okay, next is from Peter Eliasberg, and he is Chief Counsel with the ACLU of Southern California. Honorable members of the City Council, the ACLU of Southern California respectfully requests that you do not extend the declaration of a local emergency and imposition of curfew, which was first adopted yesterday. The declaration and curfew order is neither authorized by state statutory law nor consistent with the United States Constitution, including the Constitution's prohibition on restrictions of speech and assembly and its protection for the freedom of movement. The peaceful protest activity in San Clemente, with a very small number of arrests and single reported act of vandalism that occurred during yesterday's protest, activity that is well within the capacity of a small city police department to respond to, do not justify the draconian declaration of emergency and curfew, much less extending it into the weekend. We recognize that in the last few months, some individuals in other jurisdictions have damaged property in areas where many others have engaged in peaceful protests. We also recognize that there have been some small number of people injured, many of whom were harmed by law enforcement response to peaceful protests. But that unlawful conduct, which did not occur in San Clemente and has been extremely limited in relation to the enormous number of entirely peaceful protests that have occurred, also did not justify yesterday's state of emergency in large portions of the city, which has the effect of putting many city residents under house arrest for 9 hours of the night and morning. The Constitution does not permit the city to order such a restriction on free speech and travel that was put in place in an abundance of caution. We have set forth in greater detail why extending the declaration and curfew would violate state law and the United States Constitution in a letter emailed to all members of the City Council earlier this afternoon. Next email is from Stephen Noblock. I want to commend Sheriff Don Barnes and his deputies that serve our city in a very responsible and professional manner. Watching the video of the deputies interacting with the homeless man before he was shot, it is clear that the man was standing in the street blocking traffic, angry, non-compliant, yelling, and very confrontational. After multiple and what appears to be very friendly requests to get out of the street, the man's continuous and aggressive pushing of the police ultimately resulted in a scuffle. One cannot expect to start a scuffle with police officers and grab their gun without anticipating a very unpleasant outcome for the assailant. So sad that the man made the choices he made, but our police are not hired to abide lawlessness, but to keep our community safe, and that appears to be exactly what they were doing. Having ridden on a number of police ride-alongs, I have seen very calm, peaceful, and normal situations turn in an instant into a very dangerous situation requiring life and death decisions which must be made in a split second. It is easy to second-guess decisions that have to be made in a split second, but we expect our policemen to defend themselves and their colleagues with as much diligence as we expect them to defend us. Concerning extending the 9 p.m. curfew, unless there is a real and urgent need to protect our businesses and neighborhoods, I would encourage the City Council to not extend the curfew. It does not appear to have been necessary last night after all, and it only hurts our local businesses that have already suffered serious financial hardships because of Governor Newsom's lockdown orders. Thank you, council members and police officers, for your service to our city. The next is from Justin Shea, and he writes, I'm throwing my vote into the no curfew hat. Don't succumb to these white liberal nerds. The Sheriff's Department are doing an excellent job. Thanks for your time, Justin Shea, owner of JD's. Now I have the letter that the ACLU sent to the City Council. He also provided me a copy. It's not clear whether he intended for that to be read. I already read the statement that he said he wanted read. He did have 1 more minute left on his time. Do you want me to read this letter?
A minute's worth is fine, since he
Sorry,
does have a
hear
minute
you?
left. Thanks.
I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem, but the volume is terrible on my computer.
I know, mine too over here, sorry. Yes, that's fine to read a minute of the letter since he does have a minute left.
Okay, let me set my
Thanks.
timer here. Okay. Honorable members of the City Council, we respectfully request that you do not extend the declaration of a local emergency and imposition of curfew, which was first adopted yesterday. The declaration and curfew order is neither authorized by state statutory law nor consistent with the United States Constitution, including the Constitution's prohibition on restrictions of speech and assembly and its protection for the freedom of movement. The peaceful protest activity in San Clemente yesterday, with a very small number of arrests and single reported act of vandalism that occurred during yesterday's protest, activity that is well within the capacity of a small city police department to respond to, do not justify the draconian declaration of emergency and curfew, much less extending it into the weekend. We recognize that in the last few months, some individuals in other jurisdictions have damaged property in areas where many others have engaged in peaceful. Okay, that's time's up. Now, if you just give me a second, I'll check my email to see if any late communications came in. Okay, I do have one, and it's from Brad Malamud. And he writes, as a San Clemente business owner whose building has been boarded up due to the threat of violence, I appreciate the actions taken by council last night. Now it appears that the council should tonight understand that the possibility of violence to persons and property is not a static issue and may change on a moment's notice over the next few days. Therefore, the council should select someone to work with the sheriff and have the ability to impose a curfew or other emergency measures as appropriate, knowing that the council could meet on 1 hour notice if further oversight or decision-making is necessary and appropriate. There is no way that anyone can anticipate the possibilities of what might occur over the next 72 hours, and unless the council is willing to meet every night, the council needs to designate, under the government code, a person from the council to make important emergency decisions that can, of course, be reviewed by council under its emergency authority. I urge the council to take appropriate measures to keep the city safe, knowing that maintaining liberty and the right to assemble and the right to free speech must be balanced. Thank you all for protecting the businesses, property, homes, and residents of the city of San Clemente. And I believe that's all we have. Yes, that's all.
Okay, thank you very much, Joanne. I appreciate that. So let's see, we'll just go ahead and open this up for discussion. Council members?
So if no one has any comments, I'll read a motion to adjourn.
Would you like to make a motion regarding the declaration of the local emergency, the extending it? We need to make a decision on that. I think it would be prudent for us to do so, to not extend it or to extend it.
Mayor Pro Tem, our attorney advised us that the declaration of emergency just expires on its own, and the only thing that's before us tonight is whether to set it again. So if Councilmember Ham is willing to make a motion to adjourn, let him do so.
Okay, I'd like to make a comment before that, if I may. I just thought it'd be helpful for the public to have that be done, but that's fine if the majority doesn't want to. But I just wanted to indicate, or actually just reference something that Mr. Malamud had noted, that we should designate somebody to be able to call for a curfew should the situation rise to that necessity to do so, so we don't have to reconvene. That might be a good idea. What do you all think about that?
I'd like to ask staff what they think. If they think it's necessary, then I'm willing to step up and be that individual.
Staff, do we have some input on that?
Mayor Pro Tem and Council Members Erickson, Interim City Manager, based on our communications with OCSD throughout the day, at this time, we do not see a need to extend the curfew.
So if something does, say, rise to a very dangerous level in town, we'll just have to reconvene then at that point for another emergency meeting. Okay, all right, fair enough, thank you. Yes, Councilmember James.
I have a question for the city attorney, please. Mr. City Attorney, should that situation arise, would the interim city manager, under his emergency authority, be able to declare a curfew at a moment's notice?
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem Council, thanks for that question, Councilmember James. The answer is no. As we learned earlier in the COVID emergency, your municipal code is somewhat unique in that it takes a special meeting or an emergency meeting of the council to make that designation as a body. And so, no, that doesn't happen automatically. Remember, the council asked that as we do cleanup ordinances over the course of the year, we've put our finger in that page to remind you to think about it. So this issue is something that you can resolve more readily. But right now, only the council can make that declaration and make that designation.
Can that declaration be made if the individual council member we designate is outside the city limits of the city?
Yeah, the government code allows you to make that designation either to one of your body or to the interim manager or the manager, and they don't have to be in the city to be so designated.
Okay.
Any other questions? Councilmember Ward?
I don't have any questions. Councilmember James, do you see an issue that we need to declare Councilmember Ham as the designated person, or do you foresee any problems meeting again in the near future?
Councilmember Ward, I'm fine with Councilmember Ham being designated as that person. I think that my only caveat is upon declaration of a curfew by Councilmember Ham that we do convene an emergency meeting and review Councilmember Ham's decision-making process. Is that fair?
So your intent would be to do that before anything is implemented, or just for information?
Yeah, so I would be absolutely fine with right now having a motion designating Councilmember Ham as that person, as that council member who could declare an immediate curfew. And I would then like to have, in that motion, that we would then convene an emergency meeting of the entire council and review the situation at that time. Is that fair?
I'm trying to figure that out. So the mechanics of that, because it sounds like we're meeting anyway. So I do understand, if we had Councilmember Ham as a designated person, it could go into effect right away. So I wouldn't want to take that. I think we're trying to be flexible here and nimble, which is fine. So I don't have a problem that, we would convene, but it was so that we could not get a quorum of the council if we did convene a meeting, that it would not change the declaration that Councilmember Ham made.
That's exactly right. I think that's a great idea.
Okay, I appreciate that. So I will make a motion that that we do not, at this point, declare any further emergency measures of the curfew, and we designate Councilmember Ham as the one council member that can make this decision if it warrants it, if he is contacted by the authorities. And in the event that happens, that they do hold a special meeting of the council, and if there is not a quorum of the council available, that the declaration would still stand until there is a meeting of a quorum of the council.
And I can second that motion.
Okay, I'd like to make a substitute motion, and I'd like to simply insert my name into the one would be given the authority to call the curfew should it come to that. I was the only one who voted no last night on this curfew. I thought we were jumping the gun and we didn't have the intelligence necessary to have warranted such a curfew, in my opinion. And I like to follow the facts rather than presumptions, presuming what other things have happened in other cities. And we have had very, very peaceful protests in our town this year, fortunately, and excellent service from the OCSD in ensuring that as well. So I would just simply like to replicate Councilmember Ward's motion, but insert my name in place of Councilmember Ham's. Do I have a second? Hearing none, my substitute motion fails. Okay, City Clerk, let's go ahead and vote on Councilmember Ward's motion, and Councilmember James seconded that.
Councilmember Ham.
Tim, could I ask just for this clarification? The way I understood the motion, the designation is Councilmember Ham, but for the limited purpose of applying a curfew, not as a full-fledged Director of Emergency Services. It's for that sole function, as I understood it, Councilmember Ward.
That would be correct, Council, that it was for that limited purpose, and I believe that was the intent of the Council.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, City Clerk, would you like to take a roll call on that?
Councilmember Ham.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment before I register my aye vote on this issue. So, one, I appreciate the support by the rest of the council to grant me the authority to be able to do this. I take this very seriously, and I won't be doing this without Sheriff's Department and also City Executive Management to ensure this is the best case scenario for the residents and businesses of the City of San Clemente. With that, I'll be an aye.
We did receive one more public comment if you want to hear it.
Yes, please, Joanne, that'd be great.
Okay, it's from Jim Dahl, and he writes, what if Councilmember Ham is on duty at the fire department and could not be reached? That's all.
Thank you, Joanne. Councilmember Ham, would you like to respond to that question?
No, I registered an aye. I'm ready to take the vote.
Okay, fair enough. All right. City Clerk, would you like to continue the roll call?
Yes. Councilmember James?
Aye.
Councilmember Ward?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson?
No.
Okay, the motion carries 3-1 with Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson dissenting.
Thank you very much, Joanne. And would someone like to make a motion or any other comments before we seek a motion to adjourn to October 6th?
Move that we adjourn to the next regular council meeting will be held on October 6, 2020. Closed session items will be considered at 5 p.m. and the business meeting will commence at 6 p.m. This meeting will be held via teleconference.
I'll second that motion. Okay. City Clerk, would you like to take roll call?
Councilmember Ham?
Aye.
Councilmember James?
Aye.
Councilmember Ward?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are adjourned, and thank you everyone who tuned in tonight on a Friday night to participate. Good night.